Hello, beloved. Welcome to Imperial Stories. Even if you're new here or a part of the family, we are so grateful for all you do for this wonderful family. Before we dive into today's video, let's take a moment to say a quick prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this amazing day and for bringing all these wonderful viewers to this channel. We ask for your guidance, blessings, and wisdom over each of them. May this content inspire, uplift, and bring positivity into their lives. Please help us grow, so we can continue to reach more hearts and minds with the message we share. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, if you're enjoying the content so far, I'd love to invite you to hit that like button and share this video with your friends and family. Your support means the world to us, and each like, share, and comment you leave helps the channel grow and reach even more people. It's really simple, but it makes a huge difference. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and click that notification bell so you never miss an update. It helps us know what content you're enjoying and gives us the encouragement we need to keep creating. We truly appreciate every one of you. Your engagement isn't just a number, it's the heart of this channel. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your support, and let's dive into today's video. Let's dive in. She gave her heart to the wrong man, and betrayal left her broken. When desperation pushed her into the arms of a stranger, she never imagined that stranger would be Harrison Murphy, one of America's most powerful billionaires. But behind his empire lies a man just as lonely, just as wounded as she is. In a world of wealth, secrets, and manipulation, can two broken souls rebuild trust and find love where they least expected it? Stay with me as we unfold a story of betrayal, redemption, and the kind of love that heals even the deepest scars. The morning sunlight spilled across the vast marble floors of Mrs. Kensington's mansion, each beam catching on chandeliers worth more than Mildred had ever dreamed of earning in a lifetime. To anyone else, the mansion was a monument of luxury, dripping with wealth and class. To Mildred, it was simply her workplace, a place where her footsteps echoed like a reminder of her smallness. She tightened the apron around her slim waist, her hands still trembling from the night before. Sleep had been impossible. Images of betrayal, the kind that gutted her to her core, played like a cruel film reel behind her eyes. She had believed in love, trusted in it, given her heart to a man who promised forever. And yet, forever had crumbled into lies when she discovered he had been seeing another, mocking her innocence the entire time. Now, as she polished silver cutlery at the dining table, her chest still ached with humiliation. She wasn't just betrayed. She was laughed at by those who knew of her mistake. The betrayal had left her vulnerable, desperate to escape the whispers, desperate to erase the memory of love gone wrong. Mildred. Mrs. Kensington's sharp yet polished voice cut across the room. The older woman, elegant in her tailored silk robe, walked in with a smirk tugging at her lips. You move slower these days. Heartache should never affect your work. Mildred swallowed the lump in her throat. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll do better. Mrs. Kensington studied her, her eyes narrowing with a calculating gleam. She wasn't unkind, not exactly. But she was pragmatic, the type of woman who believed everything and everyone had a purpose, even a maid's sorrow. Do better, yes? She murmured, then turned, her phone buzzing in her hand. You may not realize it, Mildred, but opportunities can grow out of misery. Sometimes, being broken puts you in the right place at the right time. Mildred frowned faintly at the cryptic words, but before she could respond, Mrs. Kensington was already gliding out of the room, her perfume lingering in the air like a reminder that power and privilege moved at a different rhythm. Across the city, in a penthouse office overlooking Manhattan's skyline, Harrison Murphy sat in silence. His empire stretched across continents. Murphy Innovations, a tech giant that had revolutionized smart living. To the world, he was the untouchable billionaire, brilliant yet ruthless, admired yet feared. To himself, he was tired. The meeting around the sleek oak table buzzed with voices, executives pitching new ideas, analysts debating figures, but Harrison's mind was elsewhere. His eyes wandered to the window, where raindrops slid down the glass like racing shadows. He thought of the emptiness of his home, the cold silence that greeted him each night despite all his wealth. Success had given him power, but not warmth. Money filled his accounts, but not his heart. People saw the empire, but never the loneliness behind it. "Mr. Murphy?" one of the executives prompted nervously. "Do we proceed with the acquisition?" Harrison's jaw tightened, his voice low but commanding. "Yes, proceed. And next time, don't wait for me to repeat myself." The room fell silent, his authority unquestioned. Yet behind the steel mask, Harrison's chest ached with something he rarely admitted, even to himself. Longing for something real, untouched by greed or status. Back at the mansion, Mildred finished polishing the last glass, her reflection wavering in its surface. She wondered, will I ever be seen for who I am? Or will I always be just the girl cleaning someone else's table? Mrs. Kensington reappeared, her lips curling into a smile Mildred had learned to mistrust. "Mildred, dear," she said sweetly, "I have a task for you, one that may change your life. I'll introduce you to someone this evening, a man who values loyalty and service. He's different." Mildred's brow furrowed. "Different, ma'am?" Mrs. Kensington's smile widened, dripping with intent. "You'll see." That night, as Harrison Murphy sat alone in his penthouse, staring out at the endless glitter of New York's lights, he received a call from Mrs. Kensington, an old family friend. "I have someone you must meet, Harrison," she said smoothly. "A girl who needs a chance. Innocent, hardworking, broken. Yes, but sometimes broken things shine brightest under the right care." Harrison frowned, irritation tugging at him. He hated social setups, hated when people tried to mix business with personal favors. Yet something in her tone made him pause. Against his better judgment, he agreed to meet. Mildred lay awake that night in her small, dimly lit room at the mansion. Her heart still ached, her betrayal still raw, but for the first time, there was a spark of something else. Uncertainty, maybe even destiny, stirring beneath the sorrow. She had no idea that the man she was about to meet would change everything. The Kensington mansion had never looked so polished. Mildred had spent the better part of the afternoon preparing the guest dining room, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Mrs. Kensington had been unusually meticulous, directing the arrangements with a sharpness Mildred wasn't used to. The table gleamed with crystal glasses and candles, and the air smelled faintly of roses. "Mildred," Mrs. Kensington said, her voice smooth as velvet as she stepped into the room in a deep emerald gown. "I need you to sit in tonight, not just serve. Don't look at me like that. Yes, you'll join us for dinner." Mildred blinked, clutching the hem of her plain dress. "Me? But I'm not." "You're exactly what you need to be," Mrs. Kensington cut in, her smile knowing. "Now do as you're told." Confusion knotted in Mildred's stomach, but she obeyed. She always obeyed. Harrison Murphy arrived with his usual quiet dominance, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit like it was carved for him alone. The air seemed to change when he stepped inside, colder, sharper, like even the walls of the Kensington mansion leaned in to listen. He offered Mrs. Kensington a polite nod before his eyes fell on Mildred. She wasn't glamorous, not even close. She sat nervously at the far end of the table, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles whitened. For a moment, Harrison almost dismissed her. She was too plain, too ordinary. But then, something caught him. The raw vulnerability in her eyes. The unpolished honesty of a woman who wasn't pretending, who wasn't performing for his approval. It disarmed him. Dinner began with Mrs. Kensington carrying most of the conversation, boasting about charity events, friends in high places, and her long-standing connection with the Murphy family. Harrison listened politely, but his attention kept wandering back to Mildred, who barely touched her plate. At last, Harrison turned to her directly. "And you are?" His voice was low, commanding, the kind that made people sit straighter. Mildred's lips parted, startled. "Mildred, sir? And what do you do, Mildred?" He pressed, curiosity laced with the faintest trace of challenge. Her throat tightened. She wanted to vanish under the weight of his gaze, but something inside her refused to shrink further. She lifted her chin just slightly. I work here, sir. I keep things clean. Mrs. Kensington gave a small, indulgent laugh, stepping in before Mildred could say more. She's modest. A diligent girl, Harrison. Loyal. Trustworthy. She's been like family to us. Harrison's eyes never left Mildred. There was no mockery in them, only an unsettling intensity. Loyalty is rare. His words sent a shiver down her spine. As the evening drew on, Mildred found herself caught between fear and fascination. She had never met a man like Harrison Murphy. He didn't smile easily, didn't waste words, but when he looked at her, it felt like he saw past her apron and plain dress. And yet, she couldn't shake the ache of betrayal still lodged in her heart. Don't be foolish, she scolded herself silently. Men like him don't see girls like you. But fate was already weaving threads neither of them could escape. Later that night, after Harrison had left, Mrs. Kensington approached Mildred with a satisfied smirk. Do you see, my dear, that spark in his eyes? I've known Harrison for years, and I've never seen him look at someone like that. Mildred shook her head, her cheeks burning. You're imagining things. Men like him, they don't notice maids. Mrs. Kensington leaned closer, her perfume strong. Oh, but he did. And you'd be a fool not to realize what an opportunity this is. Back in his penthouse, Harrison poured himself a drink, the city's skyline blazing below. He should have forgotten her already, just another dinner guest, another face among millions. But he couldn't. There had been something in Mildred's trembling voice, her wide, honest eyes, something untainted by greed or ambition. And for the first time in years, Harrison Murphy felt the faint stirrings of curiosity. Viewers, do you believe first impressions can truly reveal the heart? Or are they always misleading? Share your thoughts. I love reading your perspectives. The next morning, Mildred tried to bury herself in work. She scrubbed the marble floors until her knees ached, polished the silver until her fingers burned. Anything to erase the memory of last night, the way Harrison Murphy's eyes had pinned her in place, the way her pulse had betrayed her by racing whenever he spoke. It was foolish, dangerous. She had been down this road before, letting her heart attach itself to promises that led only to humiliation. She had vowed never again. So why did his voice keep echoing in her mind? Loyalty is rare. Harrison, on the other hand, told himself to forget her. He had meetings stacked from dawn till dusk, contracts worth billions on the line, entire divisions depending on his decisions. A maid in Mrs. Kensington's household should have been nothing more than a passing detail. And yet, when his assistant handed him reports, he found himself staring past the words, seeing only her trembling smile. When his board argued numbers, he heard her soft voice instead. He cursed under his breath. This is ridiculous. 2 days later, Mrs. Kensington called Mildred into her drawing room. She sat poised with a cup of tea, her expression sly. Harrison has asked to see you again, she announced. Mildred nearly dropped the tray she was holding. Me? But why? Mrs. Kensington arched a brow. Why not? You intrigue him, dear. And men like Harrison aren't easily intrigued. Panic fluttered in Mildred's chest. I can't. I don't belong in his world. I'm just... You're exactly what you need to be. Mrs. Kensington interrupted sharply, her tone firm. Don't throw away what could be your chance to escape scrubbing floors for the rest of your life. Mildred wanted to protest, to shout that she wasn't a bargaining chip. But her throat tightened with fear. Fear of being trapped forever in servitude. Fear of letting an opportunity slip away. Fear of being hurt again. When Harrison saw her again, in a quiet cafe Mrs. Kensington had arranged, the tension was palpable. You didn't want to come, Harrison observed, studying her carefully. Mildred lowered her gaze. I didn't think it was proper. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe admiration. You're honest. That's rare. She bristled, her defenses snapping up. Honesty doesn't mean I want anything from you. I'm not. I don't belong in your world. For a long moment, Harrison said nothing. Then, in a voice low and deliberate, he replied, Perhaps that's exactly why I noticed you. Her heart stuttered, but she forced herself to shake her head. You shouldn't. I've already made the mistake of trusting the wrong man once. I won't do it again. His jaw tightened at the edge in her words. He recognized that tone. It was the sound of betrayal, a wound still raw. And though part of him wanted to press, another part recoiled. He wasn't sure he could offer the kind of trust she wanted. They left the cafe in silence, both carrying storms inside them. Mildred told herself to forget him, to bury herself in chores and routines. Harrison drowned himself in work, convincing himself it was safer to stay cold. And yet, both knew deep down, forgetting would not be so simple. What do you think, friends? Should Mildred protect her heart and keep her distance, or take the risk of opening up again? Comment below. I'm curious which path you choose. Estate that Saturday evening. Thunder rolling in waves that shook the old windows. Mildred had been sent to tidy the guest lounge, one of those rooms no one ever used, when Mrs. Kensington appeared in the doorway with her unmistakable smirk. Change of plans, she announced. Harrison is staying the night. The storm has grounded his flight. Mildred froze, clutching the dust cloth in her hand. Here? Tonight? Yes, Mrs. Kensington replied smoothly. And since my husband is away on business, I need someone I trust to ensure he's comfortable. You'll attend to him, personally. Mildred's throat went dry. Ma'am, You'll do it. Mrs. Kensington cut her off. Consider it an opportunity. Harrison wasn't pleased either. He had come for a short dinner, nothing more. Now, thanks to the storm, he was stranded in a house that buzzed with Mrs. Kensington's ambition. Worse, she kept making pointed comments about Mildred, pushing her forward like a piece on a chessboard. When Mildred entered the lounge carrying a tray of tea, Harrison's eyes flicked to her. She moved quietly, her hair slightly damp from the storm, her dress plain yet clinging to her frame in ways that caught his attention despite himself. You don't have to serve me, he said, his tone sharper than he intended. I'm capable of pouring my own tea. Mildred set the tray down, keeping her eyes low. It's my job, sir. Her humility, so unlike the polished pretenses he was used to, tugged at him. Is it your job? He asked, voice softening. Or is it what she tells you is your job? Mildred blinked, startled by the question. For the first time, she lifted her gaze to meet his, and he saw it then, the flicker of quiet defiance beneath her innocence. The storm worsened, knocking out power across the estate. Mrs. Kensington made a fuss about needing rest, retreating to her wing of the mansion, leaving Harrison and Mildred in charge of candles and lanterns. For hours, they moved through the echoing halls together, lighting rooms, securing windows, their silence broken only by the crack of thunder. It wasn't comfortable silence, not yet, but it wasn't hostile either. At one point, Mildred stumbled while adjusting a shutter, and Harrison's hand shot out instinctively to steady her. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, firm. For a second, the world outside could have disappeared. Mildred's breath caught. Harrison's jaw clenched. Neither moved until she pulled back abruptly, cheeks flushed. Thank you, she whispered, turning away. Harrison's chest tightened. He had touched countless hands in business, shaken deals worth billions. But this simple touch lingered far longer. Later, as the storm began to ease, they found themselves in the library, the only room fully lit by candles. Rows of leather-bound books towered around them, the air thick with the scent of old paper and rain. Mildred sat perched on the edge of a chair, trying to make herself small. Harrison leaned against the fireplace, studying her. You don't like this, he said finally. She looked up, confused. Like what? Being pushed toward me. Her games. Mildred's lips pressed together. It was dangerous to agree, but her honesty slipped out anyway. No, I don't like it. I don't want to be used. For a moment, Harrison said nothing. Then, with a surprising gentleness, he replied, Neither do I. Their eyes met in the candlelight, a fragile truce sparking between them. Both unwilling, both resisting, yet both bound by the storm and Mrs. Kensington's scheming. When Harrison retired to the guest suite hours later, Mildred returned to her small room, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't admit. She had promised herself never to fall again. But being near him, his steadiness, his quiet strength, was unraveling the walls she had built around her heart. And Harrison, staring out at the rain from his balcony, wondered why a maid's courage and honesty felt more captivating than all the wealth and power in the world. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet clarity in the air. The Kensington mansion gleamed once more, as if the chaos of the night before had never happened. But Mildred carried it with her, the memory of his hand catching hers, the weight of his eyes in the candlelight. She tried to lose herself in chores, scrubbing at invisible stains, dusting corners that needed no dusting. But her thoughts wandered back to Harrison Murphy, to the way he had seen her, really seen her, when he asked if she liked being pushed into someone else's games. Few people ever asked Mildred what she liked. A few days later, Mrs. Kensington summoned her again. "Harrison has invited us for dinner at his penthouse," she said with a gleam of triumph. "And you'll come with me. Wear something decent this time." Mildred's stomach sank. "Ma'am, I don't belong in." Mrs. Kensington waved a dismissive hand. "Don't argue. You're coming." Harrison's penthouse was nothing like the Kensington estate. Where Mrs. Kensington's home flaunted old money and opulence, Harrison's world was sleek, modern, stripped of unnecessary adornment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan's skyline, a city that seemed to bend beneath his command. But it was strangely empty. Mildred noticed it as soon as she stepped inside. No photographs on the walls, no personal touches, just glass, steel, and silence. "You live here alone?" she asked softly when Harrison offered her a glass of water. His eyes flicked to hers. "Alone is simpler." There was something in his voice, a shadow, a quiet ache. Mildred wanted to ask more, but Mrs. Kensington's chatter filled the air, leaving no room for questions. Later that evening, when Mrs. Kensington took a call and drifted into another room, Mildred found herself standing near Harrison's study. Through the open door, she caught sight of a framed photograph half hidden on the desk. A boy, younger Harrison, perhaps 16, standing beside an older man whose stern expression mirrored his own. Harrison appeared suddenly, catching her gaze on the picture. His face hardened. "Don't," Mildred startled. I wasn't trying to pry." His jaw clenched. For a long moment, silence pressed between them. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "He was my father. He believed strength meant never showing weakness, never needing anyone." His eyes shifted, dark. "I learned young that people don't love you for who you are. They love you for what you can give them." Mildred's chest tightened. She thought of the man who had betrayed her, how he had smiled sweetly while deceiving her. Different story, same wound. Love twisted into transaction. "I know what that feels like," she said quietly. "To give your heart and find out it wasn't enough. To be used." Their eyes met, two broken pasts reflected in one another. For a moment, neither wore masks. When Mrs. Kensington returned, the spell was broken. But something had shifted. Harrison was no longer just the untouchable billionaire, and Mildred was no longer just the maid. They had both glimpsed the scars beneath the surface. That night, back in her small room, Mildred lay awake replaying his words. Never needing anyone. She wondered how a man could build an empire yet live in such emptiness. And she wondered why, despite every warning she'd given her own heart, she wanted to step into that emptiness and fill it. Meanwhile, Harrison poured himself another drink in his glass fortress, staring at the skyline. He told himself he was a fool for letting her presence stir things he had buried. Yet he couldn't shake the image of her eyes when she said, "I know what that feels like." For the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. The Kensington mansion glimmered under the pale glow of late afternoon, its golden drapes catching the light like banners of wealth. Mildred moved quietly through the dining hall, polishing the long oak table until it gleamed. Her movements were steady, but inside, her thoughts swirled. Ever since that evening in Harrison Murphy's penthouse, she had been restless. She hadn't expected him to reveal anything personal, let alone the shadow of his father's harshness. And she certainly hadn't expected to feel seen, as though her own betrayal had a mirror in his loneliness. "Mildred," came Mrs. Kensington's voice from the hallway, sharp as always. "Put on a fresh dress. Harrison is joining us again tonight." Mildred froze, her pulse quickening. Again? When Harrison arrived hours later, dressed in a tailored navy suit, Mildred felt the room shift. His presence filled the space effortlessly, but this time, his eyes didn't sweep over her like she was invisible. They lingered. They noticed. She carried a tray of wine glasses to the table, and though she didn't dare look up, she felt his gaze follow her every step. Dinner stretched on, with Mrs. Kensington dominating the conversation. She laughed too loudly, praised Harrison's business ventures too eagerly, and made subtle comments about loyalty that Mildred knew were veiled hints at her. When the meal ended, Mildred gathered plates, balancing too many in her arms. She stumbled, one dish slipping from her grasp. Before it could shatter, Harrison's hand shot out, steadying the stack. His fingers brushed hers, warm, steady, commanding but gentle. "Careful," he said quietly, his voice for her ears alone. Mildred's breath caught. I'm sorry, sir." "You don't need to apologize for being human," he replied. The words stunned her. No one in this house ever excused her mistakes. They expected perfection, invisibility. But Harrison, the billionaire who could afford perfection in everything, had given her grace. As she carried the plates away, her hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from the echo of kindness she hadn't known she needed. Later that evening, Mrs. Kensington excused herself to take another one of her endless calls. Mildred, left behind in the lounge with Harrison, tried to busy herself with arranging the books on the coffee table. "You don't have to keep moving," Harrison said, breaking the silence. His tone wasn't sharp this time, but measured, almost curious. Mildred looked up, startled. I don't like sitting idle." Harrison studied her for a long moment, then asked, "The man who betrayed you, do you still think of him?" Her heart thudded. "How did you? You wear your pain like armor," he said softly. "I recognize it, because I wear mine too." Mildred's throat tightened. She wanted to retreat, to deflect, but his gaze was too steady. Slowly, she lowered herself into a chair opposite him. "I thought he loved me," she whispered. "I thought I mattered, but I was just convenient, replaceable." Her eyes stung, but she blinked the tears back. "I swore I'd never make that mistake again." Harrison leaned back, his jaw tightening. For a moment he didn't speak. Then, people betray because they're weak. They use others to fill holes they'll never admit exist. His voice cracked slightly, though he masked it quickly. It was the most raw thing she'd ever heard from him. Not arrogance, not control, just pain. For the first time, Mildred felt not just small in his world, but equal in their shared wounds. The heaviness between them lingered until Harrison glanced at the stack of coasters on the table, perfectly aligned, and nudged them just slightly out of order. Mildred noticed immediately and reached forward, fixing them. A corner of his mouth lifted. "You can't stand disorder." Color flushed her cheeks. "I like things neat." "Neat?" he repeated, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Do you clean the world one coaster at a time?" Mildred huffed, crossing her arms, but a tiny smile tugged at her lips. "And you? You create chaos with one nudge at a time." The exchange was small, almost silly, but it cracked something open. Mildred giggled softly, an unexpected, light sound that even surprised her. Harrison's chest warmed. He couldn't remember the last time he had heard laughter like that in his presence. Genuine, unpolished, uncalculated. For a fleeting second, the loneliness that had haunted him felt lighter. As the evening drew to a close, Mrs. Kensington disappeared upstairs, leaving Mildred to escort Harrison to the door. The hallway stretched long and silent, their footsteps echoing softly against the marble. At the threshold, Harrison paused, turning to her. His eyes held hers, unblinking, steady. Don't let betrayal make you believe you're unworthy, he said quietly. It wasn't you who was lacking. Mildred's breath hitched. No one had ever said words like that to her. She wanted to thank him, to say something, anything, but the lump in her throat silenced her. For a heartbeat, it felt as though he might reach for her hand again. His fingers twitched, his chest rose, and the space between them charged with unspoken meaning. But then he stepped back, his mask slipping on again. "Good night, Mildred." "Good night, sir," she whispered. When the door closed behind him, she pressed her back against it, her heart pounding. She had sworn never to trust again. And yet, in Harrison's presence, trust felt dangerously close to blooming. And Harrison, riding down in the elevator, clenched his fists in his pockets. He had vowed never to need anyone, yet somehow he already needed her. That night, Mildred sat by the small window of her narrow room in the Kensington mansion. The rain had left the world smelling clean, the streets below glistening with silver puddles that reflected the moon. She hugged her knees to her chest, staring at the glow of the city in the distance. Somewhere out there, Harrison Murphy was looking at the same skyline, but from a world far above hers. She replayed every word he'd said, every look, every fleeting brush of his hand. Don't let betrayal make you believe you're unworthy. The words burrowed into her like a seed in dry soil, threatening to bloom into something she was too afraid to name. But fear crept in just as quickly. What if he's like the others? What if I'm just another temporary distraction? A maid who caught his attention for a moment before he remembers who he is and who I am? Her chest tightened. Trust was a risk she wasn't ready to take, and yet, she already had. Meanwhile, Harrison stood alone in his penthouse, the skyline sprawling like a kingdom at his feet. His jacket lay discarded across a chair, his tie loosened. He poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. Instead, he walked to his desk and glanced at the photograph he had caught Mildred staring at days ago, the one of him and his father. He almost shoved it away as he often did, but tonight he didn't. Her voice lingered in his mind. I know what that feels like, to give your heart and find out it wasn't enough. He closed his eyes. She was right. He did know. He knew it too well. And now, against every rule he had set for himself, against every wall he had built, he wanted to give again. Not to business partners, not to women who wanted his name or his fortune, but to her, this maid with wide, wounded eyes who carried resilience in her silence. But giving meant risk. Risk meant vulnerability. And vulnerability was something Harrison Murphy had buried long ago. He sat in the dark, staring at the city lights until dawn crept over the horizon, torn between two truths. He didn't trust love, and yet he was beginning to trust her. The week after their quiet evening together, Mildred moved through her duties with a new kind of heaviness. Every step, every glance toward the door carried a question. Will he come again? Will I see him tonight? Harrison had not returned. Not to the Kensington mansion, not to her world. And though she told herself it was foolish to expect him, the absence pressed against her chest like a bruise. Mrs. Kensington, however, noticed everything. One evening, as Mildred folded linens in the hallway, she appeared with a sly smile. You've let your head drift into clouds that don't belong to you, Mrs. Kensington said smoothly. Do you really think a man like Harrison Murphy would waste his time on you? You're convenient, dear. Nothing more. Mildred stiffened, her throat tightening. Men like him enjoy the chase of innocence, Mrs. Kensington continued, her eyes glinting. But trust me, once the thrill wears off, they always return to their own kind. That night, Harrison did return, but not alone. Mildred had just set fresh flowers in the dining room when the front door opened and he walked in, accompanied by a tall, elegant woman in a diamond-studded gown. Her laugh rang through the hall, clear and practiced, her hand brushing Harrison's arm as if it belonged there. Mildred froze, the vase trembling in her hands. Mrs. Kensington's smirk widened from across the room. Ah, Mr. Murphy, welcome. And Miss Dalton, what a lovely surprise. Mildred's heart crumbled. Of course, he belongs with women like her. Beautiful, flawless, wealthy. Not with a maid who still carried the scars of betrayal. Through dinner, Mildred kept her head down, serving quietly. But she couldn't stop her eyes from flicking toward Harrison. He didn't smile, not truly, but he allowed the woman to stay close, to whisper in his ear, to laugh as though she had already claimed him. When their gazes finally met across the table, Mildred's chest clenched. His eyes held something, hesitation, maybe even regret, but she turned away before she could read more. Later that evening, when Mildred slipped into the hallway with an empty tray, Harrison followed. "Mildred," he called softly. She stopped but didn't turn. Her voice shook. "You don't have to explain, sir. I understand." His brow furrowed. "Understand what?" "That I was a fool," she whispered, finally facing him. Her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "A fool to think someone like you could ever mean what you said to me." Harrison's jaw tightened, anger flickering. Not at her, but at the situation. "What I said to you was real. Then why bring her here?" Her voice cracked, sharp with pain. "Why let her hold your arm as though—" She stopped, pressing a hand to her chest as if the words themselves cut too deep. For a moment, silence pulsed between them, filled only by the pounding of both their hearts. Harrison stepped closer, his voice low. "You think she matters? You think any of them do?" Mildred flinched. "They matter more than I ever will." And with that, she fled down the hall, her vision blurred with tears. Harrison didn't chase her. He stood in the empty corridor, fists clenched, fury and frustration colliding in his chest. He had never cared what people thought of him, but Mildred's pain gutted him. And worse, he had no words to undo it. That night, in her small room, Mildred wept silently into her pillow. She had sworn never to let her heart be broken again. But somehow, Harrison had slipped past her walls. And now it felt shattered all over again. In his penthouse, Harrison poured drink after drink, cursing himself. He wanted to tell her the truth, that the woman had been forced on him through business ties, that none of it meant anything. But the truth felt too late. He had failed her trust before it even had a chance to grow. For both of them, the bond they had begun to build now felt broken, jagged, and beyond repair. The days that followed were heavier than any storm Mildred had ever endured. She moved through the Kensington mansion like a shadow, keeping her head down, refusing to ask questions about Harrison, and refusing to acknowledge the way her heart leapt at every sound of the door, hoping, fearing. It might be him. But he didn't return. Mrs. Kensington noticed, of course. She always noticed. One afternoon, as Mildred polished the staircase banister, Mrs. Kensington lingered nearby with a smug expression. "You see, dear, I was right," she said lightly. "Men like Harrison have appetites you'll never satisfy. Best to keep your feet on the ground where you belong." Mildred bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. She wanted to scream that Mrs. Kensington was wrong, that Harrison was different. But what proof did she have? All she had seen was another woman's jeweled hand on his arm. His silence when she begged for answers. Harrison, meanwhile, buried himself in work. Meetings stretched late into the night, his team marveling at his intensity. Contracts were signed, innovations launched, but none of it filled the gnawing emptiness. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mildred's tearful face in the Kensington hallway. He tried to reach out once. He drove to the mansion late in the evening, rain streaking his windshield, but when he saw her light still burning upstairs, he couldn't bring himself to knock. Pride, fear, maybe even shame kept him rooted in the car until he finally drove away. A week later, Mildred escaped the mansion for errands in town. She lingered at a small cafe near Central Park, trying to distract herself with a cup of coffee she could barely afford. Around her, laughter and chatter filled the air, college students discussing dreams, couples brushing hands across tables, children tugging at their mother's sleeves. It was too much, too alive, too filled with the kind of joy she thought she might have had, if betrayal hadn't stolen it away twice. She slipped out before finishing her drink, wandering into the park. The autumn leaves crunched under her shoes, the city humming just beyond the trees. For a moment, She allowed herself to breathe, to imagine a life where she wasn't tethered to servitude, where her heart wasn't chained to wounds. But every time her imagination dared to stretch, Harrison's face intruded, and the ache returned. That same evening, Harrison sat alone in his penthouse, watching the same city from above. His assistant had left files neatly stacked on his desk, but he hadn't touched them. Instead, he replayed his last conversation with Mildred again and again. "They matter more than I ever will." The words cut deeper than any business loss. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she mattered more than anyone ever had. But what did it matter if she no longer believed him? His phone buzzed with a message from the woman Mrs. Kensington had introduced, Miss Dalton. A dinner invitation. He deleted it without replying. His heart was already elsewhere, bound to someone who wanted nothing to do with him. Weeks dragged on. Mildred poured herself into work, trying to numb the ache with exhaustion. She stayed later than necessary, cleaned rooms twice, cooked meals that weren't asked of her. Anything to silence the memories of his voice, his touch, his words. Yet sometimes, when the mansion grew quiet late at night, she would sit by her window and whisper to herself, "Maybe he cared. Maybe I was wrong." And other nights, anger rose. Why didn't he fight for me? Why didn't he explain? Harrison, too, spiraled. At board meetings, his temper flared more easily, his words cutting sharper than usual. His staff whispered that he was unraveling, though no one dared say it aloud. One night, after storming out of a meeting, he drove aimlessly through the city. His car took him past the Kensington mansion, its lights glowing warmly against the dark. He slowed, watching from a distance. In one of the windows, he thought he saw her silhouette. A small figure, shoulders bowed, but graceful still. His hand gripped the wheel until his knuckles whitened. He wanted to go to her, to tell her everything, to beg her to see him. But his pride was a wall he couldn't climb. And so he drove on, his chest hollow, the city blurring into meaningless streaks of light. By the end of that month, both Mildred and Harrison lived in different worlds but carried the same wound. Longing, regret, and the unbearable silence of what could have been. They were separated by pride, by fear, by the lies whispered into their ears. Yet beneath it all, their hearts still reached for each other, even as their minds told them to let go. Harrison swallow his pride and confess, or should Mildred demand truth before opening her heart again? Share your thoughts. I'm watching for your wisdom. The Kensington mansion buzzed with excitement that night. A charity gala, grander than any in recent memory, glittered under crystal chandeliers. Politicians, socialites, and CEOs filled the ballroom, their laughter rising above the music. For Mrs. Kensington, it was an opportunity to flaunt her influence. For Mildred, it was a nightmare. She had no business being there. Yet Mrs. Kensington insisted, dressing her in a borrowed gown, her words laced with false sweetness. "It will do you good to see the world Harrison belongs to," she'd said. Mildred stood awkwardly at the edge of the room, clutching her clutch bag like a lifeline. Every eye seemed to notice her plainness, her nervousness. She felt like a child stumbling into a kingdom where she did not belong. And then Harrison entered. The crowd shifted as if gravity itself pulled toward him. Tall, commanding in his black suit, he carried the quiet authority of a man who owned the room without effort. But his eyes searched, and when they found Mildred across the ballroom, a softness flickered that no one else could see. For a fleeting moment, her heart steadied, until Mrs. Kensington struck. The older woman raised her glass, her voice carrying above the chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce someone dear to me, Mildred. She's been my maid for years. Loyal, hardworking, and lately, she seems to have captured the attention of our very own Mr. Murphy." Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. Mildred's blood turned to ice. Laughter, soft, mocking, slipped from the lips of jeweled women and stiff-suited men. "A maid?" someone murmured. "Surely not serious," another whispered. "She'll ruin his reputation," a third scoffed. Mildred's cheeks burned as humiliation clawed at her. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Mrs. Kensington's smile was sharp, triumphant. Of course, Harrison deserves someone more fitting. Don't we all agree? Silence fell. All eyes turned to Harrison. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Mildred's chest tightened, her vision blurring with tears. This is it. He'll deny me. He'll let them laugh. But then Harrison stepped forward. His voice, steady and clear, cut through the murmurs. "You're right, Mrs. Kensington," he said, his eyes locked on Mildred. "I do deserve someone fitting. And I've found her." Gasps rippled again, this time sharper. "She is loyal, honest, and stronger than anyone in this room. She's faced more pain than most of you could imagine, and she still stands with grace." His gaze never wavered from hers. "Mildred is the one I choose, tonight and always." The ballroom erupted in stunned silence. Mrs. Kensington's face paled, her glass trembling in her hand. Mildred's heart thundered. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not of shame, but of disbelief. For the first time, someone had chosen her in the open, not in the shadows. And Harrison had done it before the world. But as the whispers rose louder, scandal, mockery, outrage, Mildred's chest tightened again. The war inside her hadn't ended. Could she truly belong in his world, no matter what he said? The night after the gala stretched long and sleepless. Mildred lay awake in her small bed, Harrison's words echoing through her mind. "We fit because of the cracks, not in spite of them." Her heart longed to believe him, but belief meant risk. Risk meant trust. And trust was the very thing that had nearly destroyed her once before. By morning, she resolved to leave. She began folding her few belongings into a worn satchel, her hands trembling. Perhaps if she disappeared now, Harrison could return to his world without scandal, without her shadow dragging him down. But when she stepped into the library to place a book back before leaving, she froze. Harrison was there, waiting. He stood near the tall windows, sunlight spilling over him, his jacket off, his tie loose. His eyes lifted to hers, and for once he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something that terrified him. "You were going to run," he said quietly. Mildred's throat tightened. "You deserve better than me, Harrison." He shook his head slowly. "No, I deserve you, if you'll have me." She blinked, stunned. "What are you saying?" He stepped closer, each word deliberate. "I'm saying this isn't about money, or status, or anyone else's approval. I don't want a maid. I don't want a trophy. I want you, Mildred, the woman who laughed at my crooked carrot slices, the woman who sees through every mask I wear." Her breath hitched. He reached into his pocket, pulling out not a glittering diamond ring, but a simple silver band. "This was my mother's," he said softly. "It's all I have left of her. I've kept it locked away for years because I never trusted anyone enough to share it. Until now." He extended it toward her, his hand trembling. "I'm not asking you to marry my name, or my fortune, or my empire. I'm asking you to choose me, just me, with all my flaws, my scars, my fears. And I promise, I'll choose you every single day." Mildred's heart pounded. Tears blurred her vision. Every wound, every betrayal, every whispered doubt screamed at her to run. But another voice, quieter, stronger, rose within her. "What if this is what you've been waiting for? What if love isn't about avoiding pain, but finding someone worth facing it with?" Slowly, she lifted her trembling hand. Harrison slid the ring onto her finger, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I choose you, Harrison." Relief and joy flooded his face as he pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he'd been waiting his entire life for this moment. For the first time in years, both of them felt whole. Not because their cracks had disappeared, but because together they finally fit. The days that followed their choice felt different, lighter, as though the storm that had shadowed both their lives had finally broken. But healing wasn't instant. For Mildred, trust still trembled like glass. For Harrison, old habits of control tugged at him. Yet each day, with patience and intention, they built something stronger than either had known before. Harrison began visiting the Kensington mansion less for society's sake and more for Mildred's. He joined her in the kitchen again, learning to slice vegetables without ruining them, laughing at himself when his skills still faltered. He insisted on helping with chores, much to Mildred's protests. "You're not built for scrubbing floors," she'd tease. "Maybe not," he'd reply, rolling up his sleeves anyway. "But I'm built for keeping promises." And Mildred would smile, because every small gesture proved his words at the gala weren't just a defiant outburst. They were truth. Mrs. Kensington, on the other hand, grew bitter. The more she tried to undermine Mildred, the more Harrison ignored her. At one brunch, when she snidely remarked, "Harrison, surely you'll come to your senses before the press drags your name through the mud." Harrison calmly set down his glass and replied, "Mildred is my sense. Perhaps it's the rest of you who need clarity." The room had gone silent, Mrs. Kensington's smirk vanishing. For once, Mildred didn't shrink under the weight of society's gaze, because Harrison stood firmly at her side. Weeks later, Harrison invited Mildred to his penthouse, not for a dinner, not for a business affair, but for something deeply personal. When she arrived, she found the space transformed. The cold, sleek walls now bore warmth, photographs he had unearthed from storage, shelves with her favorite books, fresh flowers brightening the corners. "You did all this?" she whispered, astonished. He nodded, watching her carefully. "Because this place was never a home. Not until you." Tears filled her eyes as she touched the petals of a daisy in a vase. "I've never had a home either. Not since my parents passed." "Then let's make one together," he said softly. That night, as the city glittered beneath them, they sat by the window with mugs of tea. No grandeur, no audience, no masks. Just Harrison and Mildred, two scarred souls daring to believe they could be whole together. Mildred leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that night in the Kensington Library? When you told me you hated being used?" He chuckled softly. "Every day. And now, he murmured, kissing her hair, "I found someone who doesn't want my empire, just me. And that's worth more than everything I've built." Months later, when whispers of their unconventional union reached the press, the world gasped. Headlines called her the maid who captured the billionaire. But for Mildred and Harrison, none of it mattered, because in their quiet moments, whether cooking, reading poetry, or simply sitting together, they knew the truth. Their love wasn't about scandal or surprise. It was about healing. And in the end, that was victory enough. At a small cafe, yes, the same one where their awkward second meeting had unfolded, Harrison sat across from Mildred. But this time, there was no cold distance, no hesitation. She laughed openly, and he watched her with unguarded tenderness. "You know," Mildred teased, sipping her coffee, "you once said loyalty was rare." "And I was right," Harrison said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Because I only found it once. With you." The cafe buzzed with chatter. The world spun around them. But for Harrison and Mildred, time slowed. They had walked through betrayal, loneliness, and fear. And somehow they had arrived here, hand in hand, heart steady at last. The maid and the billionaire. The broken and the lonely. Together, whole. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.